Treason is not the reason for the season. Episode 14, Jefferson's A Little Rebellion quote versus Jefferson's response to actual rebellions. Militia-As-Terrorism Extremists love to quote Jefferson when he said, "I hold it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing." Extremists argue that this quote shows that the founders intended for the Second Amendment to enable armed rebellion. But if Jefferson actually believed these words, he directly contradicted them in two rebellions that occurred during his lifetime. Jefferson versus the Haitian Revolution. In the 1780s, Haiti's population was made up of 40,000 whites, 30,000 free blacks, and nearly 500,000 black slaves. Slaves were being imported to Haiti by the tens of thousands from Africa every year. One reason the numbers were so high was because there was huge money to be made on labor-intensive sugar plantations. The other reason was because after bringing in a new shipment of slaves, roughly half would be dead from yellow fever within a year. In 1790, the Haitian Revolution began. Slaves rose up against their captors and fought for their life, liberty, and freedom. In 1792, Jefferson wrote to Frenchman Marquis de Lafayette, "What are you doing for your colonies? They will be lost if not more effectually secured. Indeed, no future efforts you can make will ever be able to reduce the blacks. We have been less zealous in aiding them, lest your government should feel any jealousy on our account, but in truth we as sincerely wish their restoration, and their connection with you." When Jefferson became president in 1801, his policy toward Haitian independence was to isolate the country and try to put an embargo in place. The U.S. would not recognize Haiti until 1862, by Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War. So, while Jefferson talked a good game about people having the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and if government did not secure those rights, the people may throw off their despotic government, while Jefferson talked a good game about a little rebellion being a good thing, when 500,000 people threw off their literal chains, Jefferson worked to keep them enslaved. Jefferson versus Vice President Aaron Burr's alleged rebellion. The 1800 presidential election had Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr on the Democrat-Republic ticket running against John Adams and Charles Pinckney. Jefferson and Burr got more electoral votes than Adams and Pinckney. But Jefferson and Burr got the exact same number of electoral votes each. Due to the way the rules actually worked at the time, that meant Jefferson and Burr were tied for the presidency. Burr challenged Jefferson for the presidency. The rules required the House of Representatives to decide who won. They voted 35 times and tied each time. The 36th time, Jefferson won the presidency and Burr was made vice president. This chaos resulted in the 12th Amendment being ratified 4 years later, changing the way electoral votes worked. Jefferson never trusted Burr after this. Burr served as vice president for one term. Jefferson ran for president again in 1804 with George Clinton as his vice president, and won another term. Burr headed west, and he took some men with him. He was accused of attempting to start a rebellion in Spanish-controlled West. Burr claimed he was heading to the territory of Texas to farm 40,000 acres that he leased from Spain. What Burr actually did and did not do is not clear even today. Historians believe Burr may have been planning to take over part of Texas, or part of Mexico, or part of the Louisiana Purchase. And the number of people Burr had in his support of these goals may have been anywhere from 40 men to 7,000 men. Burr denied all of the allegations. But someone sent Jefferson a letter saying Burr was attempting to start a little rebellion. And Jefferson, who in 1787 said a little rebellion now and then is a good thing and thought the country should have such a rebellion at least every 20 years or so, Jefferson, who suggested rulers be mild in their punishments of rebellions, who said one part he didn't like about the Constitution was the idea of chief magistrate because of its potential for abuse of power, Jefferson used his position of chief magistrate to try to get Burr convicted of treason, nearly breaking the checks and balances in the government. President Jefferson declared Burr guilty of treason before any trial had begun. Jefferson wanted the Treasury Department to pay for any expenses of any witnesses willing to testify against Burr. Jefferson sent blank pardons to the prosecutor to be handed out to anyone charged alongside Burr who would be willing to testify against Burr. Jefferson supported declaring martial law in New Orleans, which allowed troops to arrest people, including journalists, without warrant, and allowed them to open up mail at the post offices looking for evidence. When the judge allowed for Jefferson to be subpoenaed, Jefferson argued that as president he was independent of the judicial branch. The judge ruled that the president was not above the law. Witnesses testified that Burr had evil intent, and the judge ruled that witnesses could not engage in mind reading, but must only testify about actual physical actions they saw Burr commit. Burr was found not guilty of treason due to lack of evidence. Jefferson was so furious with the judge that he wanted to amend the Constitution so he could impeach judges. Every one of these acts, individually, could be considered obstruction of justice by Jefferson. Taken as a whole, they show a travesty of justice by Jefferson. Shays had the support of roughly 4,000 men. When Shays marched to the Federal Armory in Springfield, Massachusetts, he had roughly 1,500 men with him. And we know that in response to Shays' armed insurrection, Jefferson wrote about his Tree of Liberty and a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and how he thought there should be such a rebellion at least once every 20 years. Burr's actions, if the allegations were true, were not so different than Shays'. Yet, while Jefferson defended and downplayed Shays' rebellion in multiple letters, Jefferson went on a witch hunt against Burr. So when some militia-as-terrorism extremist quotes Jefferson's A Little Rebellion or Tree of Liberty to argue that these quotes show the founders designed the Constitution and Second Amendment with the intent that militias be private, anonymous, paramilitary groups designed to overthrow the government, take note of the following. First, Jefferson had nothing to do with the design of the Constitution or Second Amendment. He was in France at the time. These quotes come from private letters, not from the Constitutional Convention. The Constitution was created in response to Shays' rebellion, in an effort to crush rebellions like Shays', not encourage them. Second, if you actually read these letters, you will note Jefferson is complaining about the Constitution. He doesn't like the idea of a president and calls the office chief magistrate, and in those letters hopes the articles defining the president are changed before the Constitution is ratified. These quotes do not reflect the intent of the Constitution, but rather are complaints against the Constitution. Third, when Jefferson said the Tree of Liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots, remember that just a few years before he wrote this, Jefferson ran away from fighting the British invasion, which might make one wonder if his position on the importance of defending one's own country changed in such a short time, or if he intended his statement to apply only to other people's blood, not his own. Fourth, when Jefferson said a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, remember that Jefferson tried to suppress the Haitian rebellion for decades, trying to keep 500,000 people in literal chains, and that Jefferson did everything in his power to convict Burr of treason for an act little different than what he defended in Shays' rebellion. Jefferson's A Little Rebellion and Tree of Liberty quotes do not reflect the intention of the Constitution or the rest of the nation with regard to militias. Nor do these quotes appear to reflect the intentions of Jefferson himself. One rebellion that Jefferson did support throughout his lifetime was the French Revolution, which is covered in the next video. Treason is not the reason for militias and the Second Amendment. Treason is not the reason for the season.